This is Maya. It's an extremely versatile 3D animation tool. It's industry standard. It can do pretty much anything. But because it can do pretty much anything, it gives you tons of options and can be extremely confusing. So for this video, I'm just going to take you through some basic workflow that I think makes it fun without having to get into too much of the jargon and nonsense. So all we're going to do here is import 3D models that we downloaded from the internet, wrap colorful textures around them, animate them slightly, move the camera, and export them into QuickTime files. So with that, I'm going to start by opening a new scene, which will present you with this blank, empty, default Maya canvas. And sometimes you may find that your window doesn't look like mine, in which case you can always bring it back by clicking on this Windows menu, clicking Workspace, and making sure you have Maya Classic selected. And if you do and it still doesn't look right, there's always the option to reset Maya Classic to factory default down here, and that should make it all okay. So for the first step, I want to bring in a 3D model that I've downloaded off the internet. You can get them searching through Google, but one particularly good resource is this dumb website. It has lots of totally free 3D models. There are many different file formats indicated on the right side of each download window, and many of them don't work in Maya because there are lots of different 3D softwares, all with competing file formats. But the ones that I generally stick to are .obj or .ma or .mb. There are other types that work too, but those are the safest. So I've already downloaded a dog, so I'm going to bring it into my Maya scene by clicking File, Import. In this case, the dog is here on my desktop, so I'm selecting the .obj file, which is the actual physical geometry of the dog. When I import that, you'll see a tiny dog in the center of the screen. Now, mine is very small. Yours may be very small or very large, or too small or large even to see on screen. So let me show you first off the bat just how to change the size and position of your object. That correlates to these three tools on the left side of the screen here. There's one tool up here which allows for movement. So it's got three crosshairs, one corresponding to each axis of 3D space. There's the X left and right axis, the Y up and down axis, and the Z depth in out axis. So using those, you can change the position of your object. There's another one here, which is rotation, and again, there's one for each axis. And the third on the side, which just rotates the dog according to however the current camera is positioned. The final one here is scale, down at the bottom, and this again provides individual axis for stretching, or this middle square allows you to scale on all three axes simultaneously. So that's the one I'll do to make my dog bigger. The next thing I want to show you is how to navigate around your 3D scene. In Maya, this really requires a 3-button mouse because you often find yourself needing to click the scroll wheel. So let me show you. If you hold the Alt-Option key and left click, you'll find yourself rotating around your scene, orbiting around your model. If you scroll, you'll find, as expected, you zoom in and out of the model. And third, and this is what requires a 3-button mouse, if you want to pan around your scene, you have to hold Alt-Option and click the middle mouse button, and that allows you to move around the scene. So combinations of holding the Alt key and left clicking in order to rotate, scrolling in order to zoom in or out, or holding the mouse button down in order to pan will allow you to get anywhere you need to go in your 3D scene. The next thing I want to do is to apply a texture to this dog. In my case, the dog came with a pre-existing texture, which looks something like this. This is the image that gets wrapped around the 3D geometry in Maya. But you can use any image. So This is a particularly step-intensive process. It really shouldn't be, but Maya provides for too many contingencies, so bear with me. What's going to happen is I'm going to create a texture to wrap around the dog, and then I'm going to apply the image to that texture. So textures are found under this rendering tab here. If you click the rendering tab, you're presented with an array of colorful spheres. Each of these represent a different texture. Now, it doesn't matter which one we pick at the moment because we're just going to use it in order to apply an image file to wrap around the dog. So for now, I'll click this one, which happens to be called Lambert. And what that does is it creates a new texture which has been wrapped around my 3D dog model. Over here, in what's called the Properties panel, there's now a new tab for Lambert 2, and this is the information regarding that texture that I just wrapped around my 3D model. If you click the tab, it reveals information about that texture. Particular to us now is the color here. You can see if you change this color, for example to purple, that will change the color of the dog to purple. But it's the color that we want to change to be a picture. So I'm going to click this little checker box over here and indicate that I want to apply a file to the color of the object. Once I've clicked that, we're given a new window inside of the Properties panel, which now has an image name folder, and that's where I can put the file that I want to wrap around the dog. In this case, I'm going to use this dog texture file. When I open that, you can see it's now read the dog texture into this sample here, but the dog is still this flat matte gray. And that's because we need to enable the viewing of textures inside this viewer window. This is something Maya does to save on computer power, but isn't really that useful. So I almost always have this textures option enabled here. And that allows you to see the texture on the dog. Now, there are millions of ways to animate in Maya, but I'm just going to show you one for the time being. In the File menu, with Modeling tab selected, there's an option called Deform. And here there are some nonlinear deformers: bend, flare, sine, squash, twist, and wave. And these are all ways to simply distort 3D model. If you have your dog selected and you select one of these deformers, for here I'll select bend, it will create a new bend deformer which will appear as a line through your model. And we now have a new tab in our Properties panel, one for this bend thing. And if we curve it, we can see we've now bent our dog. If you find yourself clicking off it, you'll lose the Properties panel, but you can always get back to it either by clicking on your dog or by clicking on the bend deformer, and you'll see the relevant tabs. So let's say, for example, we wanted to get back and change the texture of our dog. We could click the dog and then go back and click the Lambert tab and find our color box. For now, I want to show you how to animate the bend in the deformer. So let's say, for example, we want to animate the curvature of the dog. This is similar to other software in that you have to set keyframes. In order to set a keyframe in Maya, you need to right-click on the parameter. I'll right-click on the curvature and click Set Key. This will set a keyframe at the particular point in the timeline. The timeline is down here at the bottom of the screen, and you can see now it's indicating that we're on frame 1. But if we move ahead to, say, frame 45 and change the curvature, we then have to set another keyframe. So we can right-click and Set Key. And now we have a keyframe for curvature set at 0 at frame 1 and one for 125 set at frame 45. And you'll see if I scroll in between, the dog will animate along the timeline. There's one trick for Maya that I always do. I find it cumbersome to have to set the keyframe each time I change a value. I'd rather it automatically apply the keyframe. And that's simple. you can select this little auto keyframe toggle down here, and now each time you change the value of the bend slider once it's been initially animated, it will set a new keyframe automatically. So here I have 2 keyframes set. 1, 2. The last thing I want to demonstrate is how to apply a camera to our 3D scene. You can create a new camera under the Create menu by clicking Cameras, Camera. And you can see it creates a tiny camera in the 3D scene. We now have to tell Maya that we want to look through this particular camera. We can do that using the Panels menu here, Perspective, and selecting Camera 1. Now we can see through the camera as it is. You can go back to your perspective view by clicking Perspective. So here I'm going to move the camera so that it's facing the dog's head. When we change the panel back to camera 1, you'll now see that we can see the dog's face. You can also move your camera while you're in the camera perspective by scrolling in and out or using any of the Alt, right, left, click, middle mouse button camera controls we've been using before. The camera is a physical object in your 3D space, so you can see it in the Properties panel at right. If I click the Camera 1 tab, you can see that as we change the position of the camera, the translation values are changing as well. This is how you would animate the camera, by keyframing the position of these values. For example, if I wanted to zoom into the dog's face, I might start at frame 1 and set translation keyframes for each of the 3 translation values. Later in the shot, I'll go to frame 50 and I'll zoom into the dog's face. Now we have a keyframe set for both positions of the camera. If I scroll the timeline between them, you can see our camera move happening. The last thing you'll want to be able to do is export your QuickTime movie. There are many ways to do this, but in Maya the cheapest, easiest way is to do what's called a play blast, which simply renders whatever you're looking at in your screen. That's under the Windows menu for some reason, down here under Play Blast. If you click it, it will just create a simple QuickTime movie of your 3D file. These are the very basics of working with Maya. It can be an extremely frustrating and unwieldy beast, so as usual, let me know if you run into trouble.